Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. There's something about working with your hands that makes you blind to the cracks forming around you. For the past few years, I spent most of my days at the garage or under the hood of someone's truck, trusting that while I was getting my knuckles bloody for a paycheck, Amber was handling our home life like she always promised. We weren't flashy people, didn't need much more than a cold beer at sunset and a working AC unit to be happy. Or so I thought. The first time I noticed anything was off wasn't some grand, cinematic moment. It was small, insignificant even. I got home earlier than expected after a short day fixing old man Grady's pickup when I found Amber sitting on the couch, flustered, cheeks a bit red, hair slightly tousled like she'd been running. She claimed she'd just finished a home workout, but her yoga mat was still rolled up, sitting untouched against the corner wall. I let it slide. No reason not to. We all have weird days. The second hint came a week later. Amber, who usually hated cooking, suddenly started preparing elaborate meals. Not just any meals. Meals that were too large for just the two of us. I find an extra plate in the sink, silverware soaking like it had been used in a hurry. When I asked about it, she brushed me off, said she tried plating for 3 by accident, force of habit, as if we ever had guests popping by on a Tuesday night. But it wasn't until I came back from a 2-day fishing trip that I realized I might be the only one in this marriage playing by the rules. The bed smelled different. Faint traces of cologne I didn't recognize clung to the pillows like a warning. Amber swore it was from a candle, one she supposedly bought to help her sleep better while I was away. But no candle I've ever met smelled like cheap aftershave and expensive guilt. Still, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold on to the picture-perfect image we had. Lazy Sundays, town fair dates, bonfire nights with friends. I didn't want to become one of those bitter men who suspected every glance and questioned every word. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, told myself maybe I was just tired. Maybe the fishing trip had me smelling things that weren't there. Then came the late-night phone calls. She always took them outside, pacing along the porch with a hushed voice. When I stepped out to ask if everything was all right, she'd quickly hang up and say it was just her sister, venting about some nonsense I'd never fully understand. Except when I bumped into her sister 2 days later at the grocery store and casually mentioned it, she looked genuinely confused. "I haven't called Amber all week," she said, raising a brow. That was when the air shifted. That was when I felt something real crawling under my skin. But even then, I held it together. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of. Maybe Amber was planning a surprise, or helping someone behind the scenes, or just keeping something harmless from me. I kept clinging to excuses like a man clinging to a splintered dock during a storm. I told myself to be patient. People in town looked at us like we were the couple who had it figured out. I wasn't about to let paranoia tear it down. Still, I couldn't shake it. The gut feeling that maybe I'd been blind too long. That maybe I didn't know Amber as well as I thought I did. And somewhere deep inside, I started preparing myself for the truth. Whatever it turned out to be, it happened on a slow Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing felt urgent. Amber was out running errands, or so she claimed, and I was left home with the kind of restless energy that comes from a nagging gut feeling you can't shake. I wandered around the house absent-mindedly, opening drawers, straightening up the place when I noticed her closet door cracked open, barely an inch. For reasons I still can't explain, I opened it wider and spotted a small, gift-wrap box tucked in the corner beneath some sweaters. Curiosity got the best of me. I wasn't snooping, not really, but something about the neatly tied ribbon and the golden card without my name on it didn't sit right. I picked it up, studied it, turned it over in my hands. The card read, "For the man who keeps me strong." I wasn't naive. Amber never called me anything like that. Not once. I untied the ribbon and peeled back the wrapping slowly, half hoping I was wrong. Inside was a leather wallet, monogrammed with the initials SC. My initials are NC. I stood there for a solid minute, staring at it like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. Then, tucked under the wallet, a small folded note, simple and careless. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect. No name, no signature, just enough to confirm my worst fears without handing me a full confession. Rage didn't hit me instantly. It seeped in slow, like a slow boil under my skin. I didn't confront her, didn't call her in a panic. Instead, I put everything back exactly the way I found it, careful not to disturb a thing. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. The next day, I drove to the nearest leather shop an hour out of town, picked up a similar wallet, and swapped the monogram. I had the initials crudely re-stamped to look like a mistake. The stitching didn't match, and I made sure the leather smelled strongly of the oil I used at the garage. Then I slipped the altered wallet back into the box and tucked it under the sweaters, just like I'd found it. By the time Amber came home, humming some tune like Life was perfectly normal. I'd already decided I wasn't going to let on. Not yet. I needed to see more. I needed proof. Over the next few days, I watched her closely, pretending not to notice the extra effort she put into her appearance when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The new lipstick shades, the perfume that didn't smell like the usual floral notes she wore for me. I caught her texting at odd hours, always flipping her phone over when I walked by. At dinner, I'd casually mention folks around town, trying to bait her into slipping up. Ran into Lisa from the diner. I said once, watching her reaction. She said, "You've been stopping by a lot lately." Amber blinked, but recovered quickly. "Oh, just grabbing coffee." Her voice was steady, but her hands fidgeted with a napkin. I knew better than to accuse without more. I kept my mouth shut and eyes open. I even started hanging around the diner myself, sitting in the corner like a ghost, watching. But it wasn't Lisa I saw acting strange. It was Steve, my oldest friend. He'd sit with Amber during her coffee runs, leaning in a little too close, smiling that crooked grin like nothing mattered. They'd talk in hushed tones, sometimes glancing around like guilty kids sneaking candy. It took everything I had not to stomp over and demand answers right there, but I wasn't ready to go off half-cocked. Not yet. I had to be sure. So I waited every day pretending I hadn't seen a thing, while inside I felt like a kettle about to blow. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was watching Amber carry on like everything was fine, laughing at our old inside jokes, kissing me good night like nothing was rotten under the surface. I realized then that I couldn't just catch her. I needed to understand how deep it went, who else knew, and just how far she was willing to take it. If Amber thought I was blind, I'd let her think it a little longer. I could feel the truth creeping closer, and I wasn't about to flinch. The days that followed blurred together, but every second felt sharp. I kept myself busy under the pretense of overtime at the shop, though most of that time I spent quietly circling the edges of my own life, watching and waiting. Amber kept up appearances like clockwork, smiling as she packed lunches, humming as she folded laundry, and texting just a little too much when she thought I wasn't paying attention. What gnawed at me more than anything was the uncertainty. I needed to know if I was chasing shadows or staring at the truth head-on. On a quiet Wednesday evening, I found my chance. Amber had told me she'd be heading to her sister's for dinner and might stay the night if they had one too many glasses of wine. Convenient. I didn't press. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and told her to have a good time. The moment the door shut behind her, I grabbed my coat and followed at a safe distance. My old truck rattled quietly enough on back roads, and Amber, thinking she had the night to herself, didn't even glance in the mirror. I tailed her until she pulled into Steve's garage, the big blue neon sign buzzing softly against the night sky. My chest tightened. It could have been innocent. Could have been. I parked a block away and slipped through the alley, watching from the shadowed corner like a man who no longer recognized his own life. Through the cracked side window, I saw them. Amber perched on the old leather sofa we used to sit on during late-night beer runs, Steve leaning in close, handing her a small wrapped box. She smiled, unwrapped it, and held up the wallet I had tampered with. My heart raced. I saw her expression falter when she noticed the crooked stitching and smeared initials. She whispered something to Steve, laughing nervously. Steve just shrugged like it didn't matter and leaned in to kiss her. That was all I needed. I backed away, my stomach in knots, but as I turned to leave, I stepped on a loose board. The creak might as well have been a gunshot. Amber's head snapped toward the window, but I was already gone. I drove around for an hour after that, calming myself down. By the time I returned home, Amber was already back, sitting on the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders like nothing had happened. "You're home late," she said. Tire change, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Took longer than I thought. She nodded, eyes searching mine, but I gave her nothing. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing what I knew. The next morning, I played dumb as I helped her make breakfast. I even complimented the pancakes, something I hadn't done in months, and she beamed like everything was right in the world. It was almost pathetic. I watched her closer after that. Every coffee run, every late-night grocery trip, every phone call she took behind closed doors. But then came a curveball. One evening, while flipping through Amber's planner she left on the kitchen counter, I found an appointment circled in red. Dinner with Dan? Dunn? Not Steve? I couldn't place the name. I knew most of Amber's circle, but no Dan stood out. Maybe it was a co-worker. Maybe it was a cover. Either way, it threw me off balance. The next night, I followed her again, this time expecting to find her tangled up with Steve. Instead, she met a man I'd never seen before at the diner, just off the highway. They talked, laughed, but nothing about it screamed romance. It was too formal, too stiff. As they finished their coffee and parted ways with nothing more than a handshake, I started to wonder if I had jumped to conclusions. Was Dan just a friend? A client? Was I so desperate to catch her lying that I saw betrayal where there was none? That night, I confronted her lightly. Ran into Lisa at the diner, I said as we got ready for bed. Said she saw you there with someone the other night. Amber didn't miss a beat. Oh yeah, Dan. He's helping me set up a charity fundraiser for the school. I told you about that. Had she? Maybe she had in passing, and I'd been too wrapped up in my suspicions to listen. For a fleeting second, I almost felt ashamed. Maybe I'd let my fears get the best of me. I almost apologized right there. Almost. But as I watched her turn off the light and snuggle into bed, something didn't sit right. The way she glossed over it. The lack of detail. The ease with which she sold the story. I've known Amber long enough to know when she's bluffing, even if she's good at it. Deep down, I realized I wasn't wrong. I might have misread the situation with Dan, but the lingering perfume on her clothes, the secretive texts, and the messed-up wallet told me this rabbit hole went deeper. And I wasn't anywhere near the bottom yet. The next few days passed with an uncomfortable stillness, like the town itself was holding its breath. Amber kept acting like everything was fine, humming through the house, planting fresh mums in the garden, even leaving little notes for me in my lunchbox again like she used to when we first got married. But no amount of folded hearts and smiley faces could distract me from the growing knot in my stomach. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was instinct. Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than Amber, and while she slept, I started tidying up the garage. Halfway through sweeping, I found something behind the old tool chest, a scarf I'd never seen before, folded carefully, smelling faintly of cedar and cologne, not the kind I use. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just forgotten laundry. This was deliberate. Tucked inside the scarf was a folded receipt from Benny's Motel, just off Route 9, dated 2 weeks ago. One queen room, paid in cash. I stood there for a while just staring at it. Amber had told me she was visiting her mother that day, had even sent me a picture from her mom's porch. I remember it clearly because I had commented on the weather looking better out there than it was in town. Yet here was proof that she hadn't been where she said she was. I didn't explode. I just folded the scarf back up, slipped the receipt into my pocket, and went about my day like nothing had happened. That afternoon, I even helped Amber haul a new dresser up to the guest room. "You've been quiet today," she said, catching me staring out the window during a break. I shrugged. Just tired, I guess. She kissed me on the cheek like she meant it. Maybe she did, in her own twisted way. But I wasn't about to let my guard down again. I started keeping tabs more carefully, checking her phone when she left it unattended, though she was smarter now, deleting texts and clearing call logs, watching the mileage on her car, paying attention to what time she left and returned. Each little inconsistency stacked up until the weight of it all was unbearable. I confided in no one, not even my brother, who usually knew everything about my life. I wanted proof, real proof. Then came the next crack. Wednesday night, Amber told me she was going to PDA planning meeting. She said it like it was nothing, like it was part of the usual routine, but there was something about the way she avoided eye contact when she said it that made me decide to follow. I waited until she left, counted 5 full minutes, then hopped in my truck and trailed her. She didn't head toward the school. Instead, she took the back roads out past the train tracks and onto Route 9. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as she pulled into Benny's motel, the same motel from the receipt. She parked, got out, and knocked on room 12. A few seconds later, the door cracked open, and someone let her in. I couldn't make out who it was from where I sat, parked down the lot behind a clump of trees, but the picture was clear enough. She wasn't meeting the PDA. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours, staring at that door, the anger in me simmering to a boil. Yet, when she finally came out, straightening her hair and looking around nervously before driving off, I didn't chase after her. I didn't confront her. I drove home, sat on the porch, and waited like nothing had happened. When she got home, she looked surprised to see me outside. "You're up late," she said, forcing a casual tone. "Figured I'd wait for you," I replied calmly. "PDA run long?" She blinked, barely missing a beat. "Yeah, lot to plan this year." I nodded, offering her a small smile. "You bet." She walked past me into the house like nothing was wrong, and I knew then and there I wasn't wrong. The betrayal wasn't just in my head. It was right there in front of me. I didn't sleep that night, nor the one after. I started preparing, not for a confrontation, but for something bigger. I wasn't going to simply catch her. I was going to expose her, and I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of what I'd been carrying. I just needed to be patient. It was the following weekend when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I wasn't searching for it, not actively. I was fixing the broken fence out back when I heard the soft hum of Amber's voice behind me. I turned to see her walking up with a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses like nothing had changed between us. We sat on the porch together, sipping quietly, but my mind wasn't on the lemonade. It was on her phone resting loosely in her back pocket, screen slightly peeking out. While she went inside to grab more ice, I slid it out without a second thought. I didn't expect much. She had been careful lately, but maybe too careful. I thumbed through the gallery, and that's when I found it. Hidden deep in a folder marked Invoices were a series of photos, selfies really, of Amber and Steve. The garage, the familiar oil-stained walls, even the old engine block Steve had been restoring for months in the background. It was all there. Some photos were blurry, some candid, but there was no denying who was in them. Worse still, the timestamps lined up perfectly with the nights she claimed to have been at her mother's. My throat tightened. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. Cold, hard proof. I pocketed her phone just as she returned and acted like nothing happened. "Thought I'd grab some cookies too," she said with a grin. "You've been working hard." I nodded, managing a small, forced smile. "Yeah, thanks, babe." But in my head, I was already somewhere else, racing through ideas, plotting silently. That evening, I called in a favor to my cousin Ryan, who worked at the local print shop. I told him I needed a private job. No questions asked. Ryan was used to me printing menus and flyers for the diner, so he didn't blink an eye. Within a day, I had a small stack of glossy prints. The photos I'd pulled from Amber's phone, arranged carefully into what looked like a flyer for a fake garage promotion. On the front, Amber and Steve, grinning like teenagers. I didn't plan to distribute them yet. Not until I was ready, but holding them in my hands made the whole thing feel real. The next few days were tense. Amber moved around the house like everything was perfect, asking if I wanted to go visit her mother for a weekend, suggesting little home projects we could tackle together. I played along, nodding when I had to, making excuses when I didn't. The hardest part wasn't the lying, it was the waiting. Then, late Wednesday night, I got the final confirmation. I drove past Steve's garage on my way home from the diner and spotted Amber's car tucked behind the back lot. No reason for it to be there that late, not with the garage closed. I parked a few blocks away and walked through the backwoods, careful not to make a sound. I crouched behind the old loading dock and watched as the office light upstairs flickered on. Through the broken blinds, I saw the two of them, too close, too comfortable. I couldn't hear the words, but the laughter, the smiles, it was enough. I backed away slowly, careful not to alert them. I wasn't going to storm in. That wasn't my style. No, I needed something quieter, something calculated. I returned home and stared at the stack of printed flyers. My hands shook, not from sadness, not anymore, but from the sheer adrenaline of knowing that soon, very soon, everything would be out in the open. I knew I could go to bed, but I couldn't. I sat there, staring at those flyers until the sun came up, until the soft sound of birdsong outside felt like a chorus pushing me forward. By the time Amber returned home, hair tousled and trying too hard to seem casual, I was sitting on the porch swing, sipping my coffee, pretending not to notice. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're up early." I just nodded. Didn't sleep much. She chuckled. "Big day at the diner?" I smirked slightly. "Yeah, you could say that." And with that, I knew there was no turning back. The trap was set, and Amber? She was about to walk right into it. The next morning, I woke up with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't the calm that comes from peace, but the kind you find just before a storm hits, the knowing kind. I went through the motions like I always did, frying bacon, scrambling eggs, and plating Amber's favorite blueberry pancakes. She strolled into the kitchen, humming as if nothing in the world was wrong, as if she hadn't spent last night tangled up with my best friend at his shop. "Smells amazing," she said, sitting down and scrolling through her phone. I studied her as I poured coffee into her mug, noticing how she didn't even glance up. "Big plans today?" I asked, making sure my tone was light. "Not much," she replied, taking a bite. "Probably swing by the store, pick up a few things, then help Mom reorganize her living room." I wanted to laugh at how easy the lies rolled off her tongue, but I kept my composure. "Sounds busy," I said instead. She nodded and continued eating, blissfully unaware that I knew every inch of her story was fabricated. I had already texted Ryan that morning to confirm everything was set for Friday. He texted back, all printed. Already. I could practically hear the grin through the screen. That afternoon, I drove out to Kara's place. Steve's ex had been more than willing to help when I explained what I was dealing with. Kara knew Amber had always rubbed her the wrong way, but she hadn't suspected this. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked as we sat on her porch. "It's gonna blow up." I nodded. "That's the idea." We went over the plan again, every little detail. Kara would help me make sure Amber's little charade unraveled in front of the whole town without a single word of confrontation from me. I didn't want a shouting match. I wanted a slow, steady collapse. The next few days crawled by, Amber still playing the part of the sweet, doting wife. She kept smiling at me like nothing was off, and I played along, careful not to tip her off. The part that gnawed at me wasn't even the betrayal anymore. It was how easily she carried on, like I was too dumb to notice, like I was already too broken to care. Thursday night rolled around, and I pretended to fall asleep early, giving Amber the perfect excuse to slip out. I watched from the window as she got into her car and drove off. No surprise where she went. I followed her from a safe distance to Steve's garage. This time, I got close enough to snap a few blurry photos myself, just for good measure. Then I left without being seen, leaving them to their little fantasy while I finished preparing reality. Friday arrived, and so did the flyers. Neatly stacked boxes delivered to the diner's back door. Ryan gave me a wink as he unloaded them. "Hope you're ready," he said. "More than you know," I replied. I spent the day sliding flyers under windshield wipers, pinning them to bulletin boards, and even slipping a few into the weekly church newsletter pile. Nobody knew who was responsible, and I preferred it that way. Amber was still none the wiser when she came by for her usual evening visit to the diner. She smiled and handed me a small bag of homemade cookies. "Thought you could use a treat," she said. I took them, said thanks, and watched her leave like nothing was about to explode. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold beer, watching as people walked past the diner and the corner gas station, stopping to stare at the flyers. Some laughed, some whispered, some pulled out their phones to snap a picture. I knew it wouldn't take long before the town connected the dots. By Saturday morning, the diner buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Whispers, side glances, and awkward silences filled the air. Customers pretended not to notice me, but I saw them reading the flyers tucked under their coffee cups. By the time Amber showed up with Steve to grab a late breakfast, it was too late. They hadn't seen the town's reaction yet. They hadn't seen the walls closing in. But I had, and it was just the beginning. I woke up Saturday with the sun creeping over the hills, and for once I didn't feel like I had to force myself out of bed. Today was the day. The diner would be packed, just like every weekend, and no one would be able to look at Amber or Steve without thinking about what they'd read and seen. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was patient, steady, almost detached. I cooked breakfast like I always did, the same short-order rhythm I'd repeated for years. I caught Ryan giving me knowing glances as he wiped down the counters, and every once in a while, I'd hear a chuckle from a customer who clearly had caught wind of the flyers. They were subtle enough not to outright accuse, but specific enough that no one in town could mistake who the subjects were. Amber showed up a little after 11, walking in like nothing was off, Steve trailing behind her. The diner went quiet for half a beat, just long enough for them to notice. Amber's eyes flicked around, noticing people nudging each other, staring too long, or hiding their smirks behind coffee mugs. Steve, thick as ever, didn't seem to pick up on the tension right away. He gave me a small wave. I just nodded and went back to flipping pancakes. Amber came to the counter, setting down a bag with that too-sweet smile she always used when she thought she had the upper hand. "Brought you some fresh herbs for your specials," she said softly. I kept my eyes on the griddle. "Appreciate it," I said flatly. I didn't need to say more. She knew something was off, but she couldn't quite pin it yet. Not until they ordered and sat down. As soon as they did, Kara walked in. Perfect timing. She made sure to stop by the counter first. "Morning, Nick," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You ready for tonight?" I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. Amber's head snapped up, eyes narrowing, trying to piece together what Kara was talking about. Ryan, grinning like the cat that ate the canary, chimed in. "Everyone's been talking about it." Now, Amber looked genuinely rattled. She whispered something to Steve, who shrugged like an oaf, clueless as always. When Kara left, Amber tried to act normal, chatting with the waitress and fiddling with her napkin, but I could see her leg bouncing under the table. The tension grew thicker with each passing hour. More regulars came in, whispering, casting glances their way. By mid-afternoon, Steve finally caught on. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" he muttered, leaning toward Amber. She gave a weak shrug, but kept stealing glances at me. I kept working, silent, watching the pieces fall exactly where I wanted. Around 4, I took an early break and went outside, pretending to smoke while leaning against the wall. Kara met me at the back door, holding up her phone. "They've seen the flyers," she said. "The whole town knows." I chuckled. Good. When I returned to the kitchen, the whispers had turned into full-on stares. Amber was visibly sweating now, eyes darting all over the place like she was searching for an exit. Steve looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. That's when I decided to make it official. I stepped out from behind the counter and clapped my hands once. "Folks," I said, loud enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "Before the dinner rush, I'd like to thank y'all for supporting the diner. Means the world." I paused, locking eyes with Amber. "And speaking of support, ain't it nice when friends help friends?" The room erupted into laughter, but I didn't crack a smile. Amber's face turned beet red. Steve muttered, "We should go." Amber grabbed his arm and hissed, "Not yet," desperate to salvage what little dignity she had left. But there was no salvaging it. Not here. Not now. I returned to the kitchen without another word, leaving them to stew in the aftermath. By the time they finally slinked out, barely making eye contact with anyone, I knew it was done. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was slow, public, and impossible to escape. Just like I wanted. Amber showed up at my doorstep 2 days later, rain soaking her thin jacket, eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept a wink. I saw her through the kitchen window before she even knocked. For a second, I debated pretending not to be home, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the door, she stood there shivering, clutching a crumpled envelope in her hand. "Nick, please," she whispered. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word, watching her stumble in like a stray that had lost its way. She stood awkwardly in the entryway, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. I messed up," she began, voice trembling. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Didn't mean for what exactly? The cheating? The lying? The town knowing about it? You're going to have to be more specific." She flinched like I slapped her. "I was stupid, okay? I was lonely. You work all the time. Steve was just there. I raised an eyebrow. You mean Steve, my best friend? The guy I trusted to help when I couldn't be home? That's Steve. Amber's lip quivered. I didn't come here to fight. I chuckled dryly. You sure about that? Seems like you're picking the wrong door to beg at. She took a shaky breath and held up the envelope. I want to fix this. I ended things with Steve. I've been miserable. I miss us. I nodded slowly. So what's in the envelope? Apology letter? Divorce papers? Coupons for bad decisions. She handed it over with trembling fingers. Inside was a collection of old photos. Us on our wedding day, goofy snapshots from our first road trip, silly notes we used to leave each other on the fridge. I flipped through them, expression unreadable. This supposed to change something? I asked. Nick, please, she pleaded. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, quitting the diner. I'll sell the house if you want. Just don't throw us away. I stared at her for a long time, watching the water drip from her hair onto the hardwood floor. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but the other part, the part she broke, only felt cold. Funny thing, Amber, I said, you didn't show up here because you love me. You showed up because you got caught. You didn't care about us when you were sneaking around in garages and leaving me clueless at home. Now you're here because the whole town's laughing at you. She shook her head desperately. No, I swear, I realized how wrong it was. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, I bet you did. Just not soon enough. I walked past her, opening the front door. You can leave now. Amber froze. Nick, please. I didn't flinch. Go cry on Steve's porch if you need sympathy. Mine's closed. She hesitated for a second, searching my face for any sign of mercy, but there wasn't any left to give. Slowly, she stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk down the driveway, shoulders slumped, defeated. I turned back toward the kitchen, where Kara had been quietly watching from the hallway. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded. Yeah, better than I've been in a long time. She walked up, offering a small smile. Good, because you've got a lot of people rooting for you. As Amber disappeared into the rain, I felt the first hint of peace settle over me. Not revenge, not gloating, just quiet relief that the storm was finally passing. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.